Good morning. Today we're going to talk about Jonah chapter 4, and really it would have been great if Jonah had ended at the end of the 3rd chapter, because everybody's happy. God's happy, the Ninevites are happy, but then we have chapter 4. So go ahead and pause me and read chapter 4. Okay, so you can see who's not happy. Jonah. He is pouting. He is angry. And we're not sure exactly when this happened. It could have been 40 days after when Nineveh wasn't destroyed. It could have been the next day after he finished preaching. Not sure when. But some of the scholars, people that are really, really smart, gave some reasons for his anger. One, this guy comes along and he says, okay, in 40 days, Nineveh's going to be destroyed, and it wasn't. So he loses face, and his reputation as a prophet is just not real good. Two, it's an example of Gentiles receiving God's favor, and Gentiles were no-nos. God wasn't supposed to like them. He was only supposed to like Israel, according to Israel. And three, Israel hated the Gentiles. Kind of the same thing, especially the Ninevites. They're cruel. And four, they know that sparing Nineveh makes Nineveh grow bigger, stronger, and more able to capture Israel. So that's a good reason. Five, Jonah just has this desire to see Nineveh destroyed as a sign of God's anger, because it's better to keep Israel in line, to say, God gets angry, rather than say, you know what, God's compassionate, don't worry about all of these things. It's easier to say, look at Nineveh if you don't do what I predict. And 6, just plain downright jealousy. But I think 7th is very important. Jonah can't go home. The Israelites hate him. They hate him. He saved the Ninevites. So he's not the only one feeling this way. He can't go home. So in verse 2, he prays and he's honest about his feelings, and he says, I know that you're a good God. In fact, what he says is, you are a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger, abounding in love, a God who relents from sending calamity. So this is known as these words, kind of the 13 attributes, and they're the divine attributes of God as listed in Ezekiel 34. Exodus 34, 6 through 7. So if you want to really study the 13 attributes, divine attributes of God, you can do that. I couldn't really find 13, but this phrasing is used today, even in on Jewish holy days and in their prayers. Anyway, in verse 3, he says, you're great, you've saved Nineveh, but I just want to die. I just want to die. I don't want to take my own life, because you don't want me to do that, but I just want to die. Because basically he thought his usefulness was over. He has no reason to live now. Going back up to those reasons why he's mad. And in verse 4, God says, so what's your basis for this anger? When I read this, it says, have you any right to be angry? I read this with kind of like, but a lot of the scholars seem to think this was a gentle rebuke. I look at it as more of a sarcastic, get your act together rebuke. In verse 5, he makes his way out of the city on the east side. So probably from Israel, or even from the Black Sea, he started from the east side of the city. He started from the west side and made his way east. And the land on the east is just a little bit elevated. So when he gets through, maybe he's going there. Maybe he's going there to watch the city be destroyed. But it's not. Again, we don't know the timing. And he made a shelter or a booth. So he intended to stick around. Again, it's because he can't go home. He doesn't have anywhere else to go, or because he's waiting for the city to be destroyed. But this booth is like a rough structure of poles and leaves. It's like the ones they made for the Feast of the Tabernacles. And then in verse 6, the first miracle of this chapter happens in this plant. And some say it's a castor plant because they grow fast, but it doesn't really matter because it's a miracle. It grew up overnight, huge. Verse 10 says overnight. But so this is God's command. And Jonah is elated. For once, something's going right. But he's kind of angry for the wrong reasons. And in verse 7, it's miracle number 2. The next day, guess what? The worm eats the plant. And Jonah's happiness just plummets. So, the lesson here is, are we happier for vines than we are for God? Are we more thankful for the outside trappings, the sports contest, the outings on the beach, the air conditioner, the soft drinks, the plenty of beer, etc.? I didn't write those, somebody else did. But are we more thankful for those than for the right to worship freely or for our soul's eternal redemption? We need to watch what makes us happy. Lots of things can make us happy, but what makes us happiest? In verse 8, the third miracle, there's this warm wind, this hot east wind that comes. And again, Jonah says, I'm ready to die. Don't want to do it myself, just ready to die. No sense in living. And verse 9, God says to Jonah, do you have a right to be angry about the vine? So the incredible stubbornness of Jonah here is equal to the incredible stubbornness of Israel, is equal to our incredible stubbornness to be right. And God says, so do you have the right to be angry? So God asked these questions to press home truth. So some other examples of some questions that God asked that really bring home the truth. Adam, where are you? Abel, where's your brother? Do you betray the Son of Man with a kiss? Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? So God asked these pointed questions, and pouty Jonah says, yeah, I've got the right to question you because I'm mad. And verse 10 said, you love the vine, but you didn't do anything to earn that vine. You just happened to be here where I put the vine. And verse 11, you should be more concerned about the Ninevites. 120,000 souls. So these are spiritually ignorant souls. Lots of controversy here. Some people say that's 120,000 children. Some say it's just people who've never heard of God, because supposedly the population is 600,000. But they can't tell their left from their right. So whoever it is, should Jonah not be more concerned about them than this vine growing over his head? And Exodus 33:19 says, I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. So God gets to choose. Jonah doesn't get to choose. We don't get to choose. Nobody gets to choose but God. Now, that's the end. And should I not be concerned about that great city? Obviously, yes, he is. Jonah is a type of Jesus. The 3 days in the big fish, the foretelling of the future, these things. So he's a type, and that's a word that the scholars use. It just kind of means maybe an example of Jesus. The end of the story is Nineveh. Nineveh was, in 2 Kings 17, talks about Assyria and Nineveh capturing Israel, and they had a siege of about 3 years. So Jonah's worst nightmares happened. Assyria took the Israelites back to Assyria, and they brought in foreigners to populate Israel. So they assimilated these people, and really that's the 10 tribes of Israel that are lost. That's when it happened, and it all happened because possibly Nineveh was saved here. Nineveh was destroyed around 612 BC by Babylon and the Medo-Persian Empire. So next I think we'll talk about Nahum, and it's more about Nineveh. See you then.